Welcome to the Billion Insight podcast. I'm your host Shree. Today we are excited to welcome Onuora Abuah, a multi-talented Nigerian-British actor, film director, producer, and writer. A popular name on the African continent. If you are into movies and documentaries from Africa, you must have come across his work. He's known for his impactful work like Woolwich Boys and Mona and many other movies, including many documentaries. Onuora brings powerful stories from African culture and history to life. Today, he shall be sharing insight into his journey and art of storytelling and the future of African cinema. So without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Onuora to the show. So welcome, Onuora. Welcome to the Billion Insight podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today.
No problem.
So Onuora, can we start from the beginning? Let's start with your childhood.
Okay, so my childhood begins in Kenya. I was born in Nairobi, which is the capital city of Kenya. My father was a diplomat for the Nigerian government, came from what we call Igbo land, which is the southeastern part of Nigeria. My mother was a refugee from Rwanda who grew up in Uganda. So the genocide in the 1950s between the Tutsis and the Hutus, caused by the Belgians and caused by the Germans, is what forced my mom to flee Rwanda as a young girl and go to Uganda. She met my father. They had 4 children. Due to both my parents, my mom works for the WHO, which is the World Health Organization. My father works for the Nigerian government. So we traveled so much. So we moved from there to Burundi, which is a small country next to Rwanda in East Africa. We moved to Congo, Brazzaville, not a Democratic Republic. We moved to Congo. We moved to Republic of Benin, which is a small country right next to Nigeria. And then we moved to Nigeria, where I began school in Benin, but I did more formal primary school in Nigeria. From Nigeria, we moved to Switzerland. Lived in Switzerland for about 3-4 years. And then I moved from there to boarding school in a small country called Togo, which is right next to Ghana. And then moved to Nigeria briefly and then came to the UK to finish my education and then university. And I've been in the UK for the last 20 years. So that's my story.
That's interesting. Now you live in UK full-time, right?
I'm in the process of moving back home, actually. So in the next 2 months, I won't be living in the UK anymore. I'll be living in Nigeria.
Is there any particular reason that you want to leave the UK?
Well, I think first and foremost, the economy is incredibly, especially if you live in London, it's a very tough economy at the moment. But also, I think more importantly, when you have children, when you're from outside Africa, especially if you didn't grow up here, you start to realize that if you don't take your children back home, they won't really have much of their culture. I admire, some of the Somali or Pakistani or even Indian families in and around me in the UK, but even they can't, as close as their cultures are, they can't keep their children very familiar with their culture that much. They know a lot, but not enough. For me, I always felt it's important as an African person to go back home with my children, give them that education. But also for me, I think the work that I do is better suited for me to be in Africa. Frankly, I can't stand the bad weather here in England. The weather is terrible. The society is one where, as an African man, I'm not allowed to feel very at home here. No matter what they tell you, you don't feel at home here. So I always felt at some point it will be time for me to move back to Africa. Nigeria, in part because of it's got a very thriving film industry as well, second or third biggest in the world. And so for me, I feel it's the right time to move back.
Yeah. So how you become interested in filmmaking?
Well, for me, it's I have to say this, my friend. I'm interested not just in filmmaking, but finding a way to document African history and culture. So filmmaking just happens to be the best way to do it, you see. So my background actually began, I was an actor. I'm an actor, actually. So I began actually when I was young. I used to act in school plays, and then I used to involve myself in writing school plays. In my school, I was always writing the productions that they will put on at the end of the year. I think I did one, but a class and so on. And when I came to the UK, actually, I wanted to pursue a career as an actor. And very quickly, I saw that it's very difficult first of all, the roles are not that many for somebody like me. There weren't that many African roles. And I'm talking of, 16, 17 years ago. No, 18 years ago, sorry, almost 20 years ago. I know I look young, but I'm not that young. Anyway, the roles just didn't exist. So I always felt like I should write my own stories. And so I started writing theater productions. My first play actually is a play called Another Biafra, which you can find. It's actually published into a book on Amazon. You can find it, Another Biafra, ANOTHER BIAFRA. And it basically documents the Niger Delta oil crisis. So in my country, you have companies like Shell and these oil petroleum companies, Chevron, that will come there, work with the government to extract the oil and destroy the landscape for the people. So the people have no clean running water. They have no streams to go and to nourish the soil. And so people are really suffering out there. So I wrote a play about that in London, put it on in 2010, 2011 as well. And then from there, I felt that theater is good, but you really need to impact people. You need to be in film, in cinema. So I made a short film first, which won me an award for the Commonwealth Society. So I won an award called the Royal Commonwealth Society Vision Award. So they took me to meet Queen Elizabeth and stuff like that. And from there, I made another short film. And then I made my first feature film, which is Woolwich Boys, which is about Nigerian 419, the online fraud that they do, that you always hear Nigerians do. So basically, I made a movie about that. And then from then on, I've done so much since. So, but let me stop there, and then I'll leave you to ask a question.
Yeah, you mentioned your first major movie that is called the Woolwich Boys. Can you tell us about that?
Well, Woolwich Boys is a story about a young immigrant from Nigeria who has fled. It's set in the year 2003. I shot it in 2011. But he's fled Nigeria because the strikes at the universities meant that people weren't going to university for like a year because all the universities were on strike. So he came to England and struggled to make ends meet. And because he couldn't make ends meet, he decided to look around, and his friends who were doing all sorts of credit card scams and various scams dragged him into it, and he started living the high life, and eventually the law caught up with him. The film did pretty well. It got distribution. It's in South Africa, the UK, Nigeria as well. It got some distribution, so you could see it on television. It got nominated for a few awards, but ultimately I made that movie to see whether I can make a feature film. That's a long form film. So it wasn't something which, it's definitely nothing like I would make today, put it that way.
Yep. So it was your first experiment with filmmaking. Prior to that?
No, it's my first feature film.
Yeah,
I
feature
made
film.
Short films. Yeah,
Prior to that, you made a short movie and you've been an actor too.
I won some awards. For my short film. I won one award for my short film, but my feature film, it was just, that was the first feature film I made.
Yeah. Actually, I was reading your Wikipedia page. There I find out that you attended Central Film School of London. So can you tell us about your experience there?
Well, let me say this to you. It will shock a lot of people to find out. I attended Central Film School just a few years ago.
Oh.
It was a master's degree program. I'd already made maybe 10 films by that point.
Okay.
I did the film course purely because I wanted to teach film. And I wanted to teach film back in Africa. And I needed a degree, a master's degree, and it was a quick degree program. But my first degree was actually, I studied international relations and politics. So I wanted to go down initially the route of maybe work for the UN or, work for the government, something like that. Foreign services. That's what I preferred to do.
That's interesting. I was about to ask you, does film school really help you mastering your craft? But you have already been into film industry for such a long time.
No.
And then you decided to enter into the film school for mastering. That's interesting.
Yeah, in fact, I'll say this to you, my friend. If I didn't have to do that course, I would have found the master's degree program, as far as the filmmaking side of it. Look, you can always learn. You're never too old to learn. So I'm not saying don't go to film school. But I would say overall, you don't need film school overall. Me, the things that I liked about my master's degree program was I got to do a lot of writing, not necessarily writing about films, but writing. My thesis was on the colonialism of African cinema. How African cinema was colonized over the last 70 years. Doing that type of research was far more interesting to me than making films. And also my thesis film was a short film, which I shot in the northern part of Nigeria, which focused on migration, how Africans are going through the Sahara Desert to try and get to Europe. I probably wouldn't have made a film like that if I wasn't part of the master's degree program. But I didn't have to. Most of my friends, most of my cohorts, or the people that I studied with, Maybe one or two of them, I think, are still making films now. I think a lot of people were much younger than me. I was also, how old was I when I did it? I was 35 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't, they were all 21, 22. So I was already working. And I think I always think it's good to go and do a degree when you're more mature.
Mm.
If you're more mature and you know why you're doing it, it's better rather than just doing it when you're young try something out, because it costs so much money.
Yeah.
It costs so much money to do the degree that only do it if you know you could use it.
Yeah. So you're talking about the African culture representation, the mainstream media. So what do you think? What's your opinion in a portrayal of African in Hollywood movies, any other media?
I have some mixed opinions about this, because I think your question is about the portrayal of Africans in mainstream movies. It's improving a little bit. But you see, the audience for American cinema is Americans and maybe Europeans. So they're not so concerned with Africa. So the things they tend to make, I find at times quite insulting. But also at the same time, I think their perspective on Africa, they use a European or American viewpoint to influence the work they make about Africa. For example, there was a movie called The Woman King with Viola Davis, Oscar nominee Viola Davis, Oscar winner Viola Davis. It's about the women of Dahomey, a kingdom in West Africa that had women who used to fight. The way they depicted these women in the film is that they were stronger than men, that they were, it just seemed very unrealistic the way they were portraying it. I happen to have made a documentary about the Dahomey Kingdom about 3 or 4 years ago. And the opportunity for me to learn about the Dahomey Kingdom, if I didn't make that documentary, I wouldn't have learned anything by watching the film. In fact, I would have learned a more feminist, westernized view of them, which is what they made. So just let me summarize. America should not be responsible for making African films. America should not be responsible for making Chinese films or Indian films. Those people there are meant to be responsible for their own cinema. So me, I'm more concerned with, as African people, making films for ourselves, by ourselves, and with our own perspective. I mean, that's more important.
I totally connect with you. We have a movie called Slumdog Millionaire. Do you remember? Mm-hmm. Which came out in 2008 and won the Oscars. Yeah. So it represented India in a very negative way. Even though the movie is based on a book, if I'm not mistaken, by an Indian author. And I don't think the book justifies the real picture of India either.
Yeah.
So I can totally connect with you when you say that when they make a movie about your country, they will use their perspective about your country, not necessarily the true representation of your country.
Yeah. So,
they only highlights whatever is bad about your country.
Yeah. That's the thing, because, over the years, there was a year, I think the year 2006 or 7, they had quite a few African films that came out in the mainstream in America.
Blood Diamond, right?
Blood Diamond, Last King of Scotland, and those two films in particular were entertaining, but they just showed a very westernized point of view of Africa. It's, you see, because I can choose to make a story about war in Africa and choose to make a comedy about love in America. You see, they don't come to Africa and say, oh, let me make a love story. They have to make it about some type of conflict, some type of war, some type of problem. They very rarely make a film set in Africa or a series set in Africa that is just about people living life in a simple way. So that's why I say it's not their responsibility. It's our responsibility. Even the one movie that they made recently, which they say is about Africa, which is a joke to me, is Black Panther. To me, it's a joke. All that a movie about Africa. The agenda of the movie has nothing to do with Africa. The characters in the movie they don't think like Africans. That's not how Africans think. Certainly Africans who are supposedly from a powerful kingdom like Wakanda. So movies like that, I think they are doing it for an audience who already has a bad point of view of Africa. So they're just entertaining those people.
Exactly. They want to represent that movie. They want to connect in such a way so that they cater those audience to watch that movie. It's not necessarily that it is authentic or not.
Exactly. And let me also say this to you. The US government used to fund the film industry very early on. They still do it in a different way now. But the US government, I think there's a Department of get the department, but they used to fund Hollywood. Hollywood was essentially funded in part by the US government. So the idea was propaganda. If you watch movies from the 1940s and 50s, the bad guy was always the bad guy of America. So it was the Germans or the Russians. When you watch the cowboy movies, the bad guy was always the Indian, the Native American person. When you watch the movies about, if you watch the movies that have come out in the last 20 years about Middle East, the bad person is always the Arab or the Pakistani or the Asian person. So they have their own, and even when you go back to the beginning of the film industry in America, there's a movie called, it was made in 1921, I think. It's called Birth of a Nation, where they made it was basically a recruitment tool for the Ku Klux Klan, which is the racist organization in America. The movie was essentially portraying black people, that if you allow these black people to roam, they will rape all the white women, they will do this, they will do that. Do you know that movie was screened at the White House? Do you know that up until maybe 10 years ago, I don't know, even 10 years ago, one of the most racist movies you ever watch in your life, up until 10 years ago, they were still showing that movie in film schools in England. So you see, the US foreign policy has always been to keep America looking like the hero. There's no movie you watch today about war with Americans in it that they don't look like heroes. They're always the hero. No one can be a hero except an American person. So, it's not for them. We cannot rely on them to make films for us. It's impossible. You're wasting time.
So you're saying that the stereotype they're presenting in the screen, it is a deliberate attempt.
It's deliberate, but it's funded by you see, but you yourself, you see it. When you put on the news today, the US has a bad guy. So let's say, for instance, you look at the situation with Palestine. Benjamin Netanyahu is a man who was educated in America, and his government is propped up by the US government. The Israeli government is propped up by the US government. Their secret service is backed by the US CIA apparatus. Now, what they are doing, Vladimir Putin, who is their enemy, was doing the exact same thing to Palestinians that the Israelis are doing to Palestinians. Everybody will be up in arms. The US will allow this to keep going on for 80 years because it fits their profile. And look at how that's reflected in cinema. Go and watch the movie Munich with, what's his name, Eric Bana, set in the 1970s, about these Israelis going around the world and bombing people, blowing things up because they want to further the agenda of Israel. Go and watch movies like, what's the movie called again? The movie about the Jewish man who saved people during the Holocaust, Steven Spielberg movie. What's the name of the movie again?
That is
what's the name of the movie again? Anyway, you know what I mean. You know the movie I'm talking about. The Schindler's List. That's it. Schindler's List. They were going to make a movie like that. They'll make a movie like The Pianist, and these movies will go and win multiple Academy Awards. So the U.S. foreign policy, you can see it through their cinema.
Yeah, that's definitely a concerning thing. But there are other sides I like to discuss with you. As I mentioned, I had a guest from Sierra Leone in my podcast. I was talking to him about the issues currently facing by Sierra Leone, such as the Kush epidemic, the human bone drugs. You must have familiar with that. And some past issues like the civil war and the Blood Diamond situation. So when I asked him what he thought about how the Blood Diamond movie starring the Leonardo DiCaprio impacted Sierra Leone, he responded, yes, there were definitely positive development that happened post that movie. For example, since the movie was internationally acclaimed, it put Sierra Leone on the global map, and many NGOs were established after that movie. So to be honest, I was not aware of Sierra Leone as a country and the Blood Diamond situation until I saw that movie. Even though I was very small when that movie came out, my point is that it shows how powerful a movie can be as a platform. If people like DiCaprio come forward and make a movie about a social issue, it can definitely help the situation a bit.
I agree with you. I agree with you. Film has the power to influence people and make people aware of things that weren't happening. But here's my problem. You see, when the war was going on in Sierra Leone, and America had the opportunity to get involved, just like when it was going on in Rwanda, America had the opportunity to get involved. They waited until everything had been fixed and solved by the Africans themselves. Sierra Leone, the peacekeeping armies from West Africa, in particularly Nigeria. My father was working at the time for the Nigerian Foreign Service, so he was heavily involved in not just that, but also South Africa, ending apartheid, like I said, the Rwandan Genocide. A lot of these things that are happening in Africa, Africans solved the problems. And the US or Hollywood will then come and make a story about it and in their own way recreate history. Let me give you a story of the movie Hotel Rwanda, and then I'll go back to Blood Diamond. You know the movie Hotel Rwanda with Don Cheadle? The movie was made exactly 10 years after the genocide in Rwanda. Basically, the genocide in Rwanda was a war that lasted 3 months. It was really a genocide that was where almost 1 million people were killed, hacked to death using machetes and knives and so on. Women were raped and so on. Now, the problem that created that conflict in the first place was when the Germans came, they used people based on the way they look. So, for example, if my nose is like this, if my nose is wide, they will say you are part of this group. If my nose is straight, you are part of the good group. And they used the people from the so-called good group, the Tutsi, to go and oppress the other people. So as soon as the Germans and then the Belgians left, those people started fighting. 40 years later, you had the worst genocide, one of the worst genocides that that ever happened in Africa. But it took, even when the Africans, the Tutsi people, who are the so-called good people that were being killed, when they went to beg for help from the UN, from the US government, do you know the UN sent soldiers and didn't give them guns? So they saw people, they were watching people get murdered, cut to death, children. They were opening women's stomachs and taking the babies out, smashing them on the ground. This is what they saw them doing. So 10 years later, when they go and make a movie about it, they're not making it because they're trying to help Rwanda. They want to make money. The movie was a box office hit. Blood Diamond, same problem. Was Blood Diamond not a box office hit? Leonardo DiCaprio was nominated for an Oscar. Jimon Onsu. This is to make money. Let's not make any mistake about it. They're not doing it because they love Africa. They're doing it because they want to make money. So yes, Blood Diamond might have helped a little bit with making people aware. Yeah. It's the job of the African people to make sure that the country's image outside is controlled by them, not Leonardo DiCaprio. Why should Leonardo DiCaprio help the image of Africa?
Yeah, the real intention behind that movie is really money. But yeah, I can totally see, as you earlier said, that this is not American responsibility to make a movie out of other country, right? It is our responsibility.
It's the responsibility of everybody who is there. Yeah. It's the responsibility of the people who are in that country to create their own image of their own country. That's how it's supposed to be.
Yep. Otherwise, the history will be told in a different way, and people will forget about many in past event. It happened in the past. It's happening currently as we talk.
Yeah. You see, look, let's even use that Blood Diamond example.
Yeah.
Why? You see, it's easy to make a movie and say, okay, this is what is going on now in Sierra Leone. But they don't talk about the history and how Sierra Leone got to that place. The British came and acquired that plot of land from the local people and went and got people from the Caribbean that they had took as slaves. If there was no slavery, there would be no Sierra Leone. They took them as slaves, brought them back, named the capital city Freetown. They bought some land, made the capital city Freetown. And the war that happened in Sierra Leone and also Liberia was because the Africans that the US and the British brought back started having problems with the locals. The imperialists, you see, America, Britain are imperialist countries. Whenever they go somewhere, they don't want to just join in. They want to control it.
Yeah,
that is exactly what they do. The same thing happened in Liberia, right next door to Sierra Leone. You know? So we have to understand that if you are going to tell a story, try and use try and make the story about what caused the problem, not that there's a problem now and nobody understands why this problem is there. No, because all it makes it look like is that Africans are just crazy people. We kill each other. We're talking about the people who civilized the entire planet. Yeah. One of the biggest civilizations that ever existed in the world. Ancient Egypt comes from Africa. Kush comes from Africa. Ethiopia comes from Africa. Mali, Songhai. I can name so many.
Humanity is born in Africa, right?
Yeah.
Human is born in Africa and then migrated to every other part of the world.
And not just that, they created some of the greatest societies in Africa and in the places that they went to.
Yep.
But you don't talk about that. You talk about them shooting each other, cutting each other. Even in America, look at the portrayal of African Americans that you see in cinema. You tell me maybe 5 or 6 films that you can think of about African Americans in America made by Hollywood that show you a depiction that is positive. You will not find many. I don't think you'll find 5.
Yeah.
They're always something to do with gangs, drugs, something, you know, the few movies that have been made have had to be made outside of the Hollywood system. You know, like the Malcolm X movie, for example. I don't know if you've seen the Malcolm X movie made by Spike Lee. The movie came out 30 years ago, and the Hollywood that was Warner Brothers that was supposed to be funding the movie stopped giving him money for the movie. He had to go and beg prominent African American celebrities like Bill Cosby, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson. He had to go and beg these people for money to finish a movie that was made for Hollywood because of the way he was portraying Malcolm X. See, so these things are important.
Yep. Since we are talking about the Sierra Leone, so what do you think about the Kush epidemic, the human bone drugs that is going viral in the Sierra Leone? What do you think about that?
Well, I'm not too familiar on it, but from what I do know, it's not just, and just so you know, it's not just in Sierra Leone. It's happening in my own country.
Spreading,
in fact, if you know, in Nigeria, there was a very famous politician who last year, I think it was last year, was arrested for 2 years ago, was arrested for harvesting human organs. So it's happening all over the world. Part of the reason it's happening has to do with, from my point of view, has to do with science. You see, the cells that are made in the human body of an African person have been used as medical trials and to create medicines for the last 200-300 years. Famous experiments they've done one called Tuskegee experiment, where they took African people, saw that the things that were the cells that come out from an African person, they used them to make pills. The same thing happened as an experiment they did in my own country as well, in Jos, where they were finding out that people from a certain part of the world the cells from those people, they can use for certain types of medication. So the point I'm trying to make is scientists throughout the beginning of history, even during slavery times, for arthritis, you will see that if you go and read certain books, you will see that there were some elderly white slave owners, when they had arthritis, they would put a black boy on the floor and put their feet on top of that black boy, because the cells from the melanin, the thing that makes you dark skinned, help to heal that. See, there's a reason why African people are dark-skinned. There's a reason why we are better athletes than everybody else. There's a reason why we are better singers. It's not necessarily because we are blessed. It's because the Creator said, the first man comes from here. The first woman comes from here. So I will make that the best version of humanity. And that is not me trying to use propaganda to say black people are better than anybody. That's not what I'm trying to say. Comes down to science. If African people are the first people on the earth, then surely they're the first version. The first version is always the best version. Don't look at your iPhone. The first iPhone is better than the iPhone now.
I see your point here. The picture is there is because of the environment also, the circumstance. It is near the equator, so that's why also it's happening.
But you see, there are many places that are on the equatorial line. You go to South America, there are many places that are close to it. But Africa specifically is where the first human beings, you see, we have the first human that was found there in the Rift Valley.
Yeah.
And even the first modern human, we are called Homo sapiens sapiens. So that's the version. We are 200,000 years old. 200,000 years old we are. Even that African was first found, even that first Homo sapiens sapien was born in Africa.
Yep.
So even of modern human beings, we start in Africa. So there is no way before we move out and create European and Asian and Oriental, whatever you want to call it, we started as African. And so every other version of us is a newer version. You understand what I mean?
Yep. So man, talking about your film production company, AEA Films, which has produced many interesting films. So can you tell us about the journey of creating it? And what is the platform of AEA?
Yeah, so the AEA Films are actually my initials. So I'll explain that later, but let me just explain to you how the company started. So the company was first founded in 2009. It was called Tales from the Motherland Productions. Tales from the Motherland. In other words, stories from Africa. And it was Tales from the Motherland up until 2015. In 2015, we had it wasn't an issue, but we had something that forced us to have to change the name of the company from Tales from the Motherland Productions. Also, it allowed us to separate the work we were doing in theater with the work we were doing in film. So the easiest way to do it was to make the films based on me. Now, my initials are AEA, but AOEA actually. So I'll explain that to you. My first name actually is Anthony. That's my first name. Now, I don't use that name because, you see, in Africa, all the educational system up until the 1980s, up until really the 1990s, were founded by Christian missionaries from Europe. All the schools that existed across West Africa unless it was an Islamic school, was founded by Christian missionaries. And in order to go to school, you had to have an English first name, what they call a Christian name. So every parent in Africa, I mean, it's different now. People, this generation is different, but my generation and before, everybody you will find will have an English first name and then their real name second. Because the traditional name was not allowed in the European schools. This is what we call the de-Africanization of Africans. The de-Africanization of Africans and the colonization of Africans. Where you lose your name, you lose your language, you lose your culture. So now all of a sudden, if you go to Africa, the two languages you need to know how to speak, only two, maybe three, are English, French, Arabic. You speak those three languages, you can go anywhere in Africa. Why? Arabic is not from Africa. It comes from across Sinai. French is not from Africa. It comes from France. English is not from Africa. It comes from England. But let's take my own country, for example. Just my own country has 400 different ethnic groups with their own language. 400. Why are we speaking English?
Yeah.
Why do you have to be educated in English? So my parents, unfortunately for them, I don't do it with my own children, by the way, but my children gave all of us English names except my youngest brother. Everybody has an English first name. But we're not called those names when we're home. But as soon as we're in contact with white people or in English school, that's when we use that name. Me, I got rid of mine a long time ago. And I'm not the only one. You go and look at famous musicians like Fela Kuti, famous politicians of Africa like founding fathers of Ghana, founding fathers of Nigeria. All of them had to, at some point, do away with their English names. You know, it's why if you look at heads of states today, you hear a name like Robert Mugabe, Paul Kagame. You know, understand what I mean? These are not African names. Paul and Robert are not African names. Why does an African head of state have an English name? You know, these are the problems that the president of founding president of Ivory Coast calls Louis. His name is Louis. You know, so the point I'm trying to make is it's AEA Films, and at the time I kept the AEA, but at some point, and that's why I very often don't talk about what AEA means. They are my identity. It is a way my identity.
That were your identity, yeah.
Yeah, it's a version of my identity. And then EA is my father's name. My surname is, in Africa, we name ourselves a lot after our parents. So I have E is my father's first name, and A is my surname, Abuah. Father's name is Ejo.
Yep. Then you started in 2009, you started your production house. Then you featured many short movie. Then in 2011 or 12, you featured your first movie that called
Woolwich
Boys. Yeah. Then the journey is
and then after that I got involved in producing movies for other people. I made a film with a filmmaker of mine called Woodfalls. It's his movie. I just helped him produce it. I made another movie called Mom Dad Meet Sam, which was not my movie again, but I produced it. And then I directed my second film, a movie called Mona. Mona really is a story set in the 1970s and has to do with Portuguese colonialism in Africa. Even though the movie is set in London, it's about the end of the Portuguese colonialism in Africa. You see, the Portuguese, when they ran they had 4 colonies in Africa, or so-called colonies that they controlled. Because you know how Africa was divided. Are you familiar with how Africa was divided?
Little bit, but yeah.
So in the 1880s, in the 1884, this is about 70 years after slavery had ended, even though it was still going on. The British, the Americans, the French, the Germans, the Russians, the Turkish people, the Dutch people, the Spanish people, they all came together in Berlin at a conference called the Berlin Conference in 1884. They looked at the map of Africa and they said, you know what, let's divide this place for ourselves. And so they went, some places they were successful, most places they were successful, some places they were unsuccessful. Some places they were successful in small areas, some places big areas. But for the most part, the Portuguese got 4 colonies. They got Guinea-Bissau in West Africa, the island of Cape Verde, which they say has the most beautiful women in the world. I don't know if it's true. It took Mozambique and Angola in Southern Africa. Now, when in 1960, most of the British, French, and Belgian colonies, including Spanish colonies, were starting to end colonialism. So the country started becoming independent around 1957 to like say 1960. The only places that didn't accept the end of colonialism were Portuguese countries. They wanted to hold on to these places and they ran them like plantations. So for example, See how I said we have to have a first name that was English to go to school? They said, no, you will have no African names. It made them very Portuguese. And they held on for so long that the Africans themselves had to go to war to get rid of the Portuguese, which they did in the 1970s. So my movie, Mona, talks a little bit about this history. And the story is basically about this female assassin from Angola or Mozambique, depending on how you look at it. She's an African person from a Portuguese colony who comes to London and tries to assassinate the Portuguese prime minister when he visits London. So that's what the movie is about.
That's really well-made trailer. I just, right before the podcast, I saw the trailer of that movie while researching about you. Yeah, that's a really well-made trailer. And another documentary I just came across of yours is about Egypt. And that is also really well-made documentary. So can you tell us about that documentary?
So, that particular documentary, so it's called Kemet, A Journey Through the Black Land. Yeah. Kemet as in KMT, and the story is A Journey Through the Black Land. It's a 4-part documentary series about ancient Egypt, the Nile. What many people don't know, and this is the importance of history, see, and we were talking earlier about the Americans and how they document history. Yeah. See, there's no one that will tell you Egypt is an African civilization. There are very few historians that will tell you that. Mainstream, you don't see it in books, even though Egypt has always been in Africa.
Of course, it is even part of Africa.
Exactly. And also, let us remember what the Egyptians themselves said about where they were from. They called their land Kemet. Kemet, when you read their language, which is called the Medunetta, in their language, Kemet translates to land of black people. So I was one of the first people, and I'm sure maybe there are a few people who have done something, but I'm one of the first people, I believe, to ever go to Egypt and do a whole entire documentary series looking at Egypt from the point of view of an African. What the people said about it, and how Egypt and these Africans in Egypt influenced the world in terms of religion, in terms of culture, in terms of science, and also in terms of the modern education that we have today. So thank you. I mean, that is actually about my 7th documentary. In 2017, I moved away after Mona, actually. My experience was so bad making that movie selling that movie, just dealing with distributors that were crooked, stealing my criminals, that I just didn't want to make feature films anymore. And I was also starting to have children. My children were very young, but I was starting to have children. And I said, what is important for me is to leave these children a legacy of Africa. So I made my first documentary in Dahomey about the Dahomey Kingdom that I talked about earlier. I made another documentary in ancient Mali about ancient Mali. Ancient Mali had one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever seen. It's where a man called Mansa Musa, who they say would have been the richest man to have ever lived. He was the king of Mali. So I made a documentary there. I made also another documentary about the Hausa people. Hausa and Fulani are the people that occupy northern Nigeria. They are actually come from the Afro-Asiatic language. In other words, their language is one of the languages that come from ancient Egypt, but also it's one of the languages that will call them Semitic. Today, if you say anything about Israel or about Jewish people, they call you anti-Semitic. But the reality is Semitic people are indigenous to East Africa and parts of West Africa. That's another story. Anyway, so I made a documentary about them. I then made a few other documentaries about some political figures in my country. And then Egypt is my Kemet, The Journey to the Black Land about Egypt. It's my most recent documentary.
Yep. I want to tell you something here. Since Egypt is such a fascinating thing for me, I really want to visit. So over the course of my podcasting career, I have talked to many people from Egypt also. So whenever I talk about them, what do you think about the pyramids? What do you think about the Sphinx? Often I get the answer like, we don't like that. It is just a piece of sand, we don't like that. I kept researching why the people of Egypt thinking about the pyramids is just a piece of sand. Then I realized that those who made the pyramids, as you mentioned, the ancient African people, they all gone. They all replaced by the different people. So their ancestor, they didn't build the pyramid. So why they should proud of that pyramid, right?
In fact, you couldn't be more spot on with your answer. It's the perfect answer. It's what I was going to say. The truth is, as you said, they didn't build it. The people that currently occupy Egypt, and not just Egypt, but North Africa, are people that came in in the 7th century AD, after the Hijrah. This is after the Prophet Muhammad was died, and then there was you have Abu Bakr and various other people fighting for power, and then they eventually come and conquer all of North Africa by force. That is why all of North Africa is Arabic and predominantly Muslim. But if you go to all those countries in North Africa, if you go to the south, you will see African people. Go to the south of Tunisia, go to the south of Morocco, go to the south of Algeria, go to the south of Egypt, which you see in my documentary. I even talk about it in part 3 and 4. Sorry, 2 and 3 actually. The further south you go, you see people darker than even this my thing. These are indigenous people to Egypt. So the people who are in the north, they don't have any regard for it. For 2 reasons. 1, they didn't build it, and 2, because it is anti-Islam. You see, in Islam, you don't go and build statues for yourself and show off yourself. So it is anti-Islamic. Plus also, you see, their education system is just as bad as the educational system we have in Africa or in West Africa, just as bad as the educational system that you find in Europe when it comes to history. They don't teach the accurate history. So you will see, if you go and tell one of those people that, hey, did you know the people that built this were African, Black African? They will probably be angry about it because they've been told by the Europeans that it wasn't them. Mm-hmm. But if you go back far enough in history, everybody, even the Greeks, Greeks were the people who came to study in Egypt. They tell you, Herodotus, all these people were telling you that we learned everything from these Africans in Egypt. Mm-hmm. It's only when slavery began, what they call the Aryan model, Aryan, the Aryan model of history, which is when you see, because if I enslave you, my friend, right? If I'm your slave master, and I want to keep you as a slave, I cannot allow you to think that you did anything, that your ancestors did anything good. That's why I can't allow you to be educated. Yeah. That's why I can't allow you to go to school and learn, be educated. This is what they did during the slavery time. So Napoleon is actually, if you go to the Sphinx is the great monument that you find in Giza. It's called Horem Akhet. What is called in the Horem Akhet is the real name, which is Heru on the horizon. The nose of it doesn't exist anymore. Why? The whole body is perfectly intact. Everything is intact except the nose. But it's also the problem that you find with a lot of monuments from ancient Egypt. When you see a statue, the nose is gone. Why is that? It's because the nose is the one way you can identify the true origin of someone. At least you can get an idea. You see, if you draw my face now, you remove my nose, I could easily be from India, I could be from England. Nose is the one thing, because you can see that my nose being wider, I am from somewhere close to the equator, which means I am close to dark skin or black. So Napoleon saw this. In fact, the person who accompanied him wrote about it. If you watch part 1 of my documentary, I explain exactly what the person wrote. Napoleon saw this and was so angry that the people that his country is enslaving are the authors of everything that they hold value. So he pointed a cannon at the nose and shot the nose off. But that is not taught in school.
Yeah.
Anyway, no school you'll find that.
Yeah, man. The African history and the Indian history have a lot in common. If we look into our recent history, both of us have been taken over and exploited by the foreign powers. We have very similar experiences.
That's the case. We had a similar situation to India in Nigeria, for example. So Nigeria, when the British were still in control, they governed it as 3 separate regions. The north was mostly Islamic. The southwest was a completely different ethnic group. When I say different ethnic group, I mean their language, their culture is completely different to the southeast. So initially, the British ran the north, the west, and the east separately. And they even had, you look at Britain. Britain is made up of Scotland, Wales, and England. That's how they did it. They sent a Welsh person to one place, Scottish person to another place, English person to another place. When they found out that the north couldn't sustain themselves because of Islam, they weren't very educated, but the south was, they decided to bring it together. And when they brought it together, it created a lot of the problems that you see today in Nigeria. Boko Haram, terrorism, all this stuff is happening because of the British bringing 3 very different groups together. Now, when independence came, they had the option, just like they had the option in India, where they said, okay, we'll split off with Pakistan, we'll put most of the Muslims who can form Pakistan, and later Pakistan broke off into Bangladesh as well. But they had a similar situation at independence. But in Nigeria, people from the south decided, some of them from the south decided, no, let's all go as one country. Otherwise, Nigeria would have been 3 different places now. We almost had exactly the same situation as
Pakistan. Yeah. Okay, so moving on. Since you are a filmmaker, what do you think? What is your dream project?
I have a few. Some of them I won't say because I don't want to spoil them, but I have two. Let me give you one for documentary and one for feature film. The documentary one I want to do is about the Niger River. You see, the Niger River begins in what is called Guinea, West Africa, flows into places like Sierra Leone, Mali, northern Nigeria, and then it bends at my hometown where my father is from before it goes to the Atlantic Ocean. Over that span of the river, it covers so many cultures, so many different points in history, so many languages. My dream project would be to do a documentary about the Niger River. My dream project for a feature film is a script that I've already written called Ku-Dita. It's about a military coup that takes place in 1980s in a fictional West African country. I've been trying to get that movie financed for the last 2019. We got a producer. We tried to do it in Nigeria. We tried to do it in Canada with a Canadian company. Every time, just the world is not ready. But it's so interesting. Last year, you had more military coups in Africa than you had since the 1980s or 1970s. Over the space of about 12 months, you had a coup in Niger, Chad. You had a coup in Gabon. You had a coup in Burkina Faso. You had a coup earlier in Mali. You had a coup in Sudan. We kept having coups. So I think now the movie's importance will start coming a little bit. So those are my two dream projects: a documentary series about the Niger River, because everyone talks about the Nile. Well, really, the Nile is the main river in Africa people talk about. No one talks about the Niger River, and I want to do that. Hopefully, in the next year or two. Hopefully.
Your work is really inspiring, man.
Thank you.
You find lesser-known things or issues about your country and turn them into films and documentaries. Kudos to you. Keep doing this.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. The problem with these things is money. It costs money to make these projects, and people don't want to finance things like that. If they want to finance it, they want me to put somebody in it that is to make it more interesting. And I'm like, I don't mind, but don't give me conditions. Let me do it the right way.
Yeah, that's the money is a real problem here. People wants to watch those we call it masala movie, which means the big hero movies, which is nonsensical actions, which is
it's so sad. And I also think that is because I don't find because the thing that's happening in Bollywood is also happening in Nigeria, so-called Nollywood, and I hate both terms, by the way. I hate both terms
absolutely.
So much.
Me too, man. Me too. But I spoke it about multiple times. I really had the term called Bollywood.
I cannot stand it. I think it's an insult to the filmmaking that we have. Because what it's basically saying is you don't have your own. You have a version of someone else's. But anyway, what is happening in your industry and happening in my industry in Nigeria is the same. Our people have said, okay, something works and makes money. But because they have the colonized mindset, see, a colonized mindset is not something that you can easily see. People might say, oh, I'm very traditional. But their mind deep down is colonized. In fact, there's a man called Dr. Obadile Kambon. He's a good friend of mine. He has this thing, it's actually his father's. It's a theory called that every African person has an imaginary white person in their head. And they don't even realize they do. And it is the job of that African person to re-Africanize and remove that white person from their head. Very few of us do. So when you go and look at the movies, the movies we make in Nigeria, some of the movies, they're so, you'll see women with the hair that is like a white European woman, or even not traditional hair. You will see them talking in British accents. You will see them making movies about living in the big suburbs when 90%, they said by 2050, we'll be the poorest country in Africa, I think, or we'll be in the top 5 poorest countries in the world. They don't make any movies to show how people are living. People just make movies for entertainment. Same thing you see in America. African Americans, their movies is the same thing. The popcorn movies, movies that people are jumping and blowing things up, nothing to really impact knowledge and understanding. So what I was trying to get at is we are in the same boat, both our countries. And that is why it's so difficult to make projects like the ones I want to make, because no one is interested. Even if it's the most exciting movie in the world, they don't care because the subject exposes too much.
Yeah, it will be flop in box office. Yeah. But people later acknowledge that, it was a good movie.
Yeah. My movie Mona, for example, I got invited to, I can't remember now, but dozens of film festivals across Africa. I was winning I won an award in Egypt, actually. Grand prize of the Luxor Film Festival. I beat out movies that had won $2-3 million budgets. My movie didn't cost, I think it would cost about 100,000. Because the subject matter was so powerful. When it came to my country today, I won this very big prize, grand prize, with money and everything, right? I got presented the award by the governor and everything. It was all over the news, everything. My own country was not interested in distributing the film. England, even, when I came back to England, they weren't interested in distributing the film. I'm not saying you have to distribute my film, but can you imagine if I made a movie about, I don't know, homosexuality, for example, or something which is a buzzword topic now, or I don't know. If I made that, it's very obvious. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Not 100%, but I'm pretty sure they would have pushed it. I'm making a film where I'm exposing the opening monologue of that film is a quote. I'm speaking for a man called Amilcar Cabral, who was a freedom fighter for Guinea-Bissau, fought to liberate his people and was murdered by the Portuguese and the CIA. I gave him a quote where he talks about how Portugal is a useless country, is a colony of Britain. They only do what Britain wants them to do. I didn't get invited to. Britain and Portugal did not allow me to one single film festival. I got invited to festivals in Canada, all over the world, but those two places and my own country, Nigeria, was not interested at all. At all.
But when they realize it would be too late.
Yeah, it will be too late. But also, I think I'm also very grateful. I think the world in some ways is waking up a little bit, at least in Africa, a little bit. Because they're starting to see things like Christianity, Islam, politics, democracy, all these things that were brought from outside. They're starting to see that it doesn't really work. It's not helping people's lives. It's not changing anything. It's not changing anything. In fact, you say that with those things, people's lives are getting worse. And because of that, people are starting to say, okay, how did we live before these people came? I'm hoping some of my work and the work of other people is helping people see that.
I just remember one thing which Christopher Nolan said, that he actually made Batman not because he truly want to make it, but because money is there. If you make a Batman, then you will gather that money for your next project.
Yeah. Like Oppenheimer, yeah.
Once he made the Batman, he get enough money to make another movie that is called his dream project, was Inception, then Interstellar, those movies.
Yeah, and if you look at those movies, with all due respect, those are very boring movies. I'm not saying they're not good. I'm not saying they're not good, but what I mean is there's no major action.
Which one you're talking about?
Inception, for instance, is a very, very intelligent movie. Now, this is what I'm trying to explain. If he had made Inception before he made Batman, he would have been this movie is boring, it's dead, it's this. If he made Interstellar, look at what Interstellar is about. I love, those are my three favorite movies of Nolan. Interstellar, Dunkirk, and The Dark Knight Rises for different reasons. But those two movies, let's take a movie like Dunkirk. What is so exciting about Dunkirk? These soldiers are running away to the beach. They're trying to escape to go back to Britain. If he made that movie before Batman, no one would want it. It's boring. That's what I'm trying to get at. I'm not saying Interstellar and Inception are bad movies. I'm just saying that if you made them before he made Batman, you would not be talking about them.
Yeah. Yep.
You see, even Oppenheimer. I love Oppenheimer, by the way. People don't like the movie. Oppenheimer is I don't remember how many hours. It's almost 3 hours of
more than 3.
Of talking. That's all they're doing is talking.
Only arguments.
They talk for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Movie made $1 billion.
Yeah.
Against Barbie. $1 billion.
Yeah.
So that tells you automatically that the audience doesn't really know what they want.
Yeah.
They don't know what they want. Because most people, if you watched Oppenheimer, if he made Oppenheimer before he made Batman, this movie will be in fact, it will be in the ground. No one will talk about that.
Yeah. Now, totally. I totally agree with that.
See, so that's what I mean. Everything is about perception. The audience doesn't always know what they want. And the Hollywood execs, the the studio execs, they know exactly that the audience doesn't really know. They don't really know.
They want the typical one, the one which they saw in last summer. If you do another sequel to that movie, they come.
That's it. Marvel's whole industry was based off the fact that they had comic books. Now, if you take, and you see the two things that work for Marvel are the comic book fan base and then the actors they get to play the main parts. After Robert Downey Jr. did Iron Man. Yeah. Iron Man 1, I saw it in the cinema. Again, let's not be sentimental. It's not a fantastic movie. It's a good movie, but it's not fantastic. But you have two things, an inbuilt audience and a very charismatic actor. Put them together, good. But the story itself, for this man, he's a scientist, very rich, creates Iron Man costume. Nothing really exciting. Or they went to go and do Thor with, what's the guy's name? The Australian guy.
Chris
Hemsworth. He goes and does Thor. The first few movies don't really make that much money, but they have an inbuilt audience. And Chris Hemsworth, nobody really knows him, but inbuilt audience, it doesn't make that much money. That is why when you go, they had to bring them all together in the Avengers. And every 3 or 4 years, they make an Avengers movie. That Avengers movie is what allows the audience to keep going with the next few movies. Because my older brother was a big comic book fan. Thor was not his favorite. Iron Man was not his favorite. He was more into Spider-Man. We were all into Spider-Man growing up. We were all into Spider-Man growing up. But those movies like Thor, what's the girl's name again? Black Widow, all these movies.
Scarlett Johansson,
no one really cared about those characters. The audience and Stan Lee and Marvel and the Hollywood system said, okay, you know what? If we can just keep making these movies, we will culminate the audience that likes the comic books and also the audience that likes all the other franchises. That's why if you look at Black Panther, very few people knew about Black Panther. But if you watch how they introduced Black Panther, they put Chadwick Boseman, Black Panther, they put him in different movies before they made the Black Panther movie. Remember, he appeared in different movies before, in small roles, before he finally landed in, I think he was in the first Captain America or the second Captain America. I can't remember which movie. They put to introduce them so that Black Panther, when it finally comes out, makes 1.3 billion. See? So it's just marketing. It's very intelligent marketing. But the audience themselves don't know what they want. Now, all of a sudden, there are people that talk about Black Panther as if it's their favorite. But when the comic books were being made in the 70s, they were not interested. You see? So that's what I mean by the audience sometimes needs to be educated.
I do see this Marvel's movie and all this, not the superhero, high budget mega blockbuster movie like, Fast and Furious. Any other, the big series. I call them as fast food of movies.
Popcorn. I call them popcorn movies. They're popcorn. You just need, you can't, because you put that movie on in your house, you will not be entertained. When you put it in the cinema with the noise and everything and your popcorn. Fast and Furious is, I mean, what is Fast and Furious? Really? What is that movie? It's like a cartoon. A plane is flying.
One or two movies good, but they kept making forever. That is the problem, right?
That's it. And that's what Hollywood does.
They kept making.
That's what Hollywood does. When something is good, they find a way to make it more and more. You look at Police Academy. Do you remember Police Academy? So when in the 80s, when I was a kid, there was these movies called Police Academy about police academy. They were big box office movies. These guys, they come to learn how to be police. They're very, very funny. They made part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, part 6. So Hollywood would do this.
Yep, man. So, man, what advice would you like to give aspiring filmmaker like me?
Okay, well, I will say this. I will say you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility not just to yourself, but to your audience and the people that are coming after you. You see, in everything you do, we have reached this place in society now where nobody thinks about tomorrow. They don't think about the next generation. People go and put all sorts of videos of themselves online, saying stupid stuff, doing stupid stuff. They don't think about, what if my children see this? How would that influence the world? As a filmmaker, you have a huge responsibility, because when people go and see it, when people go and see your work, they need to be either educated, they need to be entertained, number one, but they need to also be educated in some way. I'm not saying go and make something that's history or anything, but you have to give them something that will allow them to think. Because if we don't give them things, information that's going to allow them to think, the world is going to keep on getting dumber and dumber and dumber. I don't know how old you are, but I'm pretty sure children being born now know less about the world than you did. You, when you were a kid, maybe, you opened your books, they told you this is what it was, because there was no internet. When I was a child, everything was in books. We had internet a little bit, but nobody really used the internet that much. So what we were told in books, we were forced to learn and use our imagination. Today, a 2-year-old child can go on the internet and find something. It doesn't make him smarter. It just gives him more access. And I think today, especially when you have the opportunity to make films that people go and see, it's important for you to educate. You see that Oppenheimer movie we're talking about now? See, I think that was one of Nolan's dream projects as well, because said he'd been working on it for like 10 years by himself, and he finally got to make it, and he was so successful. But with Oppenheimer, everything that's talked about in Oppenheimer, you could have Googled. He took it upon himself to make a movie that shows you the conversations that were happening. So even though you are thinking, okay, yeah, this is boring, you're still taking it in. So I say to filmmakers, accept the responsibility of being a filmmaker. It's not a joke. Mm-hmm. It's not a joke. Take it seriously. You're creating images that will stand the test of time.
Exactly. One question here about the crafting of your art, the filmmaking, the film you do. How do you balance the storytelling with addressing the sensitive social issues?
Oh, for me, I always start with the story I want to tell. Remember, I'm also an actor, but also I'm a storyteller first. You see, I'm not a historian. I might make stuff that is about history, but I'm not a historian. I'm a dramatist. In other words, let's find the drama in the story. You see, when you go and look at history, I mean, again, Oppenheimer is about what? The bomb, the atomic bomb. But the backstory is about a love story. You know, there's a love story subplot going on between him and the wife. Yeah. Unfaithful and so on. The driving force, this is the driving force of the story. Yes, is a man who has a plan to go and make the bomb, but life is still going on around him. So you have to balance it because life is complex. Right now, you're doing this podcast with me, but you have so many things going on in your life. So if you said I wanted to make a movie about creating my podcast, you have to include the drama that's going on in your life so that you can show how you overcame to create the podcast. So it's not really a case of balance. It's something which, if you're telling a story properly, the balance will already be there. What you just have to make sure and do is that you don't over dramatize and make the exciting parts of the story overemphasized. Understand what I mean? It's making sure you're doing it's just the right amount that you need, not going over the top. Because Fast and Furious, for example, we were talking about that earlier. Fast and the Furious, I don't know what number are they on, 10 or 11, I can't remember. But I stopped watching. I think I stopped watching them at like 6 or 7. I can't remember, 5 or 6. I stopped watching them. But at the end of the core of the story is about this group of people that come together to whatever it is their mission. Maybe they've kidnapped one person or they have to make money or whatever. The core is still what keeps the story going. The core is still human beings being human beings. They go over the top because now they make those human beings fly in a car, jump from building Burj Khalifa to another building. They go over the top, and that is really a choice because of the money that they make. But ultimately, every story has that balance. Every story.
Yep. Absolutely. So you mentioned that you have to put little drama over there. So could you explain that part, the drama part?
No, I mean that what I mean is the drama is part of the story. So everybody is motivated by something. What they call the protagonist. So your main character, the antagonist, the bad guy, and really there's in life everybody is both, by the way. But the protagonist has a goal. The antagonist has a goal. So one is going like this, and they cross. Okay. It might not be a person. Protagonist might be like, oh, I need some money, and his bills are crossing. So how do you get rich when you have all these bills? So the point I'm trying to make is in the drama part, if you do it properly, is already going to be in there, because nobody just says, oh, I want to walk from here to, let's say I want to walk from England to India. Okay, I just start walking. That's not the story. Because real life will tell you, okay, what visa do you need to have to be able to do that? Okay, when you get tired, where do you sleep? Who do you meet along the way? That's part of the drama.
Yeah, just you mentioned that if I wanted to tell a story about my life, how I became a podcaster. So the protagonist would be me, the podcaster. The antagonist would be the challenges which I face during the course of my podcast.
Yeah, and the antagonist, and in cinema, what they tend to do is make the antagonist a person. There's always the bad person. Yeah. Make the antagonist the person. But really in life sometimes, I mean, if you're in prison, for example, if you're making a story about a man who's in solitary confinement in prison, he's not seeing anybody except himself. So the antagonist is in the brain,
Yeah. So you started your journey in 2009, right?
So my acting journey started 2006 is when I became an actor. 6. Yeah, and then 2009 is when I started officially making my own things. So yeah.
Okay. Have you done any fiction or only you into the non-fiction only?
No. All my Woolwich Boys, Mona.
I mean, inspired from the true event, right?
No, not really. I mean, true events in the sense that Woolwich Boys, for example, is based around a particular time, but all the characters are made up. Mona is the Portuguese prime minister came to London in 1973, but Mona didn't exist. Most of the people didn't exist. I just took a historical time period and made the story set in that. And then even the movie that I just shot a movie in September called Catching a Thief. It's based on a true story that took place. Basically, in 1984, there was a politician who ran away with $100 million, ran to England, was hiding. And because the Israelis wanted the oil from Nigeria, they came to the president of Nigeria and they said, hey, we will find what can we do to get your oil. And he said, look, if you can bring that man back, if you can kidnap him from England and bring him back to Nigeria to face trial, we'll give you the oil. So they actually did it. I made the movie. This took place in 1984. I made my movie 2024. So 40 years later. In the 1984 version, they weren't successful. In my version, I don't want to spoil it for you, but it was a different. But the movie is in post-production. It'll be coming out end of this year on, I think, Prime or Netflix.
Oh, interesting, man. All the best for that. We are looking forward to it.
Thank you. I'll let you know when it comes out.
Yeah, man. One last question related to this crafting. So what kind of research goes into making the authentic movie? What kind of research you do?
I mean, research is you have to have an interest in it first. You see, because if you're making a film properly, there's a lot of research. So let's just say you're making a movie about 1973 like I was. My costume department is already doing research because they have to say, okay, how would people dress in that time period? My set designer will be like, okay, what would this building look like? What kind of furniture would be? So there's constant research when you're making a narrative feature film. For me, from the historian point of view, it's very important that I focus on a particular point. You cannot do a general history. So let's say I'm doing a movie about India during colonial times in 1947, for example. 1940, for example, just before you became independent. I cannot focus on everything that's going on in every corner. I pick a character, focus on what that character does, and base my history and research around somebody that is similar to that. I usually start all my stories by finding someone that really existed or close to existed, and then putting them in my own environment that I want them to. I'm writing a movie at the moment taking place in 1901 in West Africa. It's not based on anybody. It's based on me and how I think I would have lived at that time.
That's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that with us today. So when we are on the final segment of our podcast, we call the instant insights. Okay. I will fire off some quick question. You have to answer as fast as you can. Okay. So are you ready?
Ready.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Cats or dogs?
I don't like any of them. Cats.
Beach or mountains?
Beach.
City or countryside?
Countryside.
Blue or green?
Green. That's a good one. Blue or green? Green.
Best way to start your day?
Walk. I go for a walk.
Most used app on your phone?
WhatsApp.
Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
Introvert or extrovert?
My wife says I'm an extrovert, but I'm an introvert. Big time.
Most recent hobby you picked up?
My hobbies are pretty much the same since I was a child. I would say weightlifting.
What is your go-to stress relief method?
Stress relief method. I like watching classical films. No, actually, no. Classical films is like every day, but stress relief is traveling to West Africa. Like I traveled the countryside, going by road and seeing things. That's more complicated. So actually, I'll say watching classic films.
Best way to spend your weekend?
Watching movies, spending time with my wife. Yeah, staying at home, watching movies, sitting outside in the garden, drinking something, talking to friends. That's just simple for me. That's how I like life, And that's why I want to move home, because home, you can do that. You sit outside, people come to your house, you drink, you talk.
Yeah.
The weather is always raining and, oh God, depressing, very depressing.
Define yourself in one line.
Striving to make his ancestors proud.
Great one. Travel back in time or forward in time?
Whew, that's a very good one. Back in time.
If you could have any dinner guest, dead or alive, who would it be?
God. I wish you'd told me about this before. I would have thought about it. A man called Thomas Sankara passed away in 1987. He was a revolutionary leader in a country called Burkina Faso, a small country in West Africa. And he basically said, we're going to stop using westernized things, stop spending money like westernized people. We're going to use our own indigenous clothes. We're going to make our country viable. He even changed the name of the country from the one that the French called it to one called Burkina Faso, which means land of the upright men. He was murdered by his best friend with the help of the French and the CIA. And the country has never been what it was since 1987. So I would have dinner with him. My parents actually met him. So I love hearing stories from my mother. They met him because of what they did for a living. But Thomas Sankara.
Interesting. If you could fix one issue of Africa overnight, what would it be?
I would remove the borders.
The square and rectangular border by the British.
Remove the borders. Let's move around. And I think when people move around freely, they can control their destiny. I think when you restrict somebody to one place, they have to either contend with stay here or get out of the country. Whereas when there's no border, they can go, come back, free, cool, come back, get ideas from different people, take their own ideas elsewhere, and make Africa ultimately a better place.
The entire Africa would be one complete nation.
Yeah, even if it's not one nation, even if it's just because you see the whole problem is even in the old times, you never had nations. The concept of a nation is a fairly new concept. You had maybe whole cities that will occupy a whole area and as an empire. So people were always free to migrate, traverse the whole area because you're able to take ideas and intermix. That is how the world has reached where it is today. The world didn't get there because Britain stayed all the way in Britain in that island and became so great. No, they had influence from everywhere. And even today, you see, if you look at the UK, a year ago, we had an Asian Prime Minister, Asian Scottish First Minister, Asian Mayor of London, and they're not even 10% of the population because they've allowed people from around the world come in and do something. You look at their football team. The reason why their football team is always successful at getting to finals, semifinals, because they have migrants from all over the world. They have from Nigeria, from Jamaica, and so on. And that has helped. Ultimately, migration is a good thing. I would remove the borders. I'll remove the borders completely.
Yeah. That is why America has become America now, right?
Thank you.
Successful. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So do you think that the European Union, the way they handle this cross-border thing is good if that implemented in Africa, in African Union?
Yeah, I think the European Union, if the European Union was not formed and then you had the common market that was formed in the 1970s, if that didn't happen, we wouldn't be talking about Europe right now. Because look at the countries that prop up the European Union. You're talking about Germany, France, Belgium, Switzerland. The rest of the countries, about 20 other countries, are like third world countries. Spain a little bit, Portugal a little bit, but Greece, Rome, all these smaller countries, Poland, these are countries which, you go to those countries and you just see how, that is really what they call third world countries. You look at the rest of the countries in Europe that are not even fully part of the EU, Romania, the Balkan countries, Czech Republic. These are places where if you didn't have the EU, it would be nothing today. There would be nothing. You would be laughing at them. You'll be sending aid to them. The UN will be sending aid with the Red Cross to those places because they don't have anything. Even in Britain, if you go to Wales, go to Scotland, if you want to see poverty, you can see poverty in those places. It's like the USA. There are places of the USA that are so rural and so poor. Yeah. You wouldn't believe this is the same as New York or Los Angeles. It's even in Los Angeles. I was in Los Angeles a year ago. In LA, there's a place called Skid Row. Hundreds of thousands of poor people just living on the street. You want to tell me that's the greatest country in the world? No, it's because they're part of the United States. Otherwise, more places would be like that.
Yeah, man. So according to you, what is the best way to handle success?
Share it with your family and give it to those who need it the most. That's financial success. And also remember that success is not yours. We all want success. We're all human beings. We all aspire to be bigger and better than we are. But I think this is why I've had opportunities to go and people always say, oh, why don't you just go make something popcorn? I got offered some studio offered me about 2 years ago, oh, come and do this movie. It's a popcorn movie. You'll be really successful. And I was like, I can't. I just can't. The story is not in line with my belief. I can't. So I think success when I do have, and I think I'm in my own way I'm successful because I've made work that I'm proud of, children are proud of, and even if they are the only ones that are proud of it, it's enough for me because I realize that in this world, what you leave behind is the most important thing. The truth of the matter is, you don't even remember your grandfather's first name. Most people. So the idea that we're going to live forever is just a joke. We're not going to live forever. We're not.
Yeah. So the opposite, the best way to handle failure,
is to mourn failure like a death. I've had incredible, I can't even go into detail, just sheer failure. I've had situations where I've made a movie and we lost investors and I had to go to the bank, borrow some money from the bank. I couldn't pay people. I've had situations where we couldn't get distribution for a movie and I had to pay to hire cinemas to release the movie and I lost all my money. I've had serious failures. But I mourn them like they are a death. See, because if you get up and keep moving, it's good. You'll keep moving, obviously. But when you mourn it and say it is dead, it is now in me, it is now over, and you're able to go up and then look back and say, okay, that's made me better. My father just passed away a few months ago. I've never been more sure of what I'm doing. There's a way that when your father dies, that it makes you, my friend said it, my friend called Dr. Kambon, he said, there's a way that you become more free when your father dies. So all my failures, I look at them as part of a bigger story because my father is dead now, almost 90 years of age. God knows what he went through that he failed at. I will never know. All I know is that I look at my father and say, let me go and mourn his death. This was a great man. We don't know what he went through. So failure is not going to last forever. So just get through it, deal with it, know that it has happened, mourn it, and move on.
Excellent. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, man.
Problem.
I think this is a phrase of perspective I'm getting from you.
Thank you.
One thing you like to learn.
Oh, very good. I would like to learn multiple African languages. Multiple. And I'm trying. I'm trying to. I've applied to enroll for Kiswahili lessons, which is a language spoken in East Africa. Enrolled to learn Yoruba, which is one of the major languages spoken in Nigeria. I've had a few lessons over the last 2 years. So I'm trying in my own way. But if I could, I would speak multiple African languages. Multiple. I speak French, I speak English, speak a bit of German, and I speak a bit of my traditional language, but I don't speak many African languages.
Who inspired you the most?
I'll say more I find out about him, my father, and second person would be Malcolm X. Malcolm X, because he was a man who, you see, in life, everything is about transformation. The way he started, his life was horrible. His father was killed by the Ku Klux Klan racist people. His mother was put in an insane asylum. His family was torn apart. He did a job, wasn't good at the job, became a thief. Became a criminal, went to prison, came out and still became a man that, he joined a new religion first. I missed that part. Joined a new religion, rose up in that religion, got kicked out of that religion, and still became a man that was honored by not just his family, but the people who came after him. When you talk about Malcolm X, you talk about, in America, they talk about him as same way as they talk about Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King had been in it because his father was a priest. He was a priest. Malcolm X was a criminal. So in life, transformation is everything. And even if I may not be 100%, I wouldn't have done everything like he did it, but the fact that a person can transform, a man can transform that many times and still maintain his integrity. For me, those are two people that because my father was also a man of transformation. Yeah. So those, my father and Malcolm X.
Interesting. It's the most challenging part of filmmaking.
There are two. One is finding the money. Two is building the team and shooting. For me, the writing is easy. Even the editing is easy. I edit my own movies too. Finding the money, you go to, for instance, this last movie we made was so challenging. It felt easy, but it was incredibly challenging. We went to Cannes Film Festival. I go to Cannes every year. So you go there, you hustle, trying to find producers, this. Get the money, trying to find the right team. See, make the crew of a movie and make the experience horrible or easy. Mm. And for me, that's the part which, that whole process. And then shooting is obviously very difficult. But, the more money you have, the easier shooting becomes. Spielberg will shoot a movie over 200 days. That same movie, if I wanted to make it, I'll make it over 1 month. So there's a big difference between 30 days and 200 days. If I have the luxury, then there's no stress. There's a trailer for me. There are 100 crew members. That part is not the toughest. It's because of finances. If you get money and the right team, you're okay.
Yep. So you're saying that to find the like-minded people is difficult. The people who share the same vision as you.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much that. It's more people that you trust. See, because, a crew of a movie is... movies have this ability to... Film sets have this ability to bring people together or make people separate. People I made my first feature film with, I only talked to one person today. I fell out with everybody after. My second film, on the other hand, I still talk to everybody. My third feature film, I'm talking of the things I've directed, my third feature film, people who I even knew from before that I'd worked with before, I don't speak to anymore. Because it has this ability, it's such a strained environment, such a stressful environment. And you don't know how people deal with stress. I'm having a funeral at the moment, and I'm having friction with family members that my entire life I was happy with them. We got along. Now we're having friction in a way that you almost think we might not talk again after this. So it's stressful environments have the ability to bring the worst out of you. So I would say, crew, you have to get the right crew, not necessarily like-minded, but people who you can trust. People who you can trust. And that takes time. You have to have made one or two. It's always better. And that's why if you look, people work with the same people. Quentin Tarantino works with the same producer last 30 years. Martin Scorsese worked with the same DOP, same editor. Because it's a tough environment. It's already a stressful environment. To go and do it to people you don't like makes it even more stressful.
Yep. So what is the most rewarding part of filmmaking?
I used to say when an audience watches it, but really I have also learned that, like we said before, movies sometimes an audience might not like it now, but they might like it, like Scarface, when it came out, nobody liked it. And then 20 years later, everybody's watching it. So I think now what I look for, especially with my documentaries, is genuine appreciation. So, I used to go into screenings sometimes of my movies, and I would never stay for screenings of my, like the movie premiere, I would never stay. I leave. After the first screening, if it's not good, I never watch the movie again. Whereas now, I'm now looking for one or two people who genuinely liked it. I'm okay with that. So that's, I would say, is the most rewarding. And I think I would say also when the investors get their money back. Once they get their money back, I'm happy.
That's the job of a filmmaker, and you act as a producer also.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense, yeah. So according to you, which is the most deserving film of all time? Or you can say the underrated movie of all time?
Oh my God, this is your questions are so, they really make you go into your soul, and it's I really wish you told me this, you gave them to me before, because it's I'm on this platform, I can't just say something that I don't mean. Look, I would say underrated movie of all time. I would rather say movies which I think people should have seen and appreciated more. One is a movie called Mandabi, an African movie made in 1966 by one of the greatest filmmakers in the world, a man called Sembène Ousmane from Senegal. Went to international film festivals when it came out and everything, but wasn't really seen. It is storytelling from an African point of view It's in completely in indigenous language, Wolof language, and has to do with like how we all, Indian people, African people, we have people that move abroad to Europe for greener pastures. And they leave people back home who become entitled. See, for me, it's films like that I love. I would say that one. And movies that I think are good at teaching people something that they wouldn't have known. I would say there are quite a few. I would say two more films, if you don't mind. JFK by Oliver Stone. Actually, no, I wouldn't say it's underrated because it won Oscars. Salvador, a movie called Salvador by Oliver Stone, which is about the El Salvadorian crisis in the 1970s, and how the CIA, US government was funding death squads, right-wing death squads. Oh my God! Now I'm starting to remember a few other films. Battle of Algiers.
Is it from Africa?
No, it's South America. El Salvador. And then Battle of Algiers is an amazing film, and a movie called Z. I think if you're a filmmaker and you want to understand how to make films about something political, but also make them exciting, watch the movie Z. It came out in 1969 by a filmmaker called Constantin Costas Gavras. Watch that film. Another movie is a movie by Gilo Pontecorvo, starring Marlon Brando, called Burn. Quemada is the Spanish name. So Burn, Z, Battle of Algiers, Salvador, and Mandabi. If the world ended today and you wanted to see a movie about South America, North Africa, West Africa, Europe, those are the 5 movies that I would suggest that every person watches. If you want to find out about those places, go and watch those 5 movies.
That's a really interesting answer, I would say.
Yeah.
I don't know if I told you earlier, then what would be the answer? I mean, you already tell amazing answer, I would say.
No.
Diverse answer.
As I started speaking, I started remembering a few.
Yeah.
Because those are the movies that inspire me. Those are the movies that I could put on right now when I'm trying to find something to get me going. And I watch those movies and they get me moving. Salvador, Burn, Quemada, which is about the slave trade and how Europeans used African soldiers to fight the rebellions in the Caribbean and then put lighter skinned Africans to run the islands. Z is set in Europe. Fantastic film about politics and socialism. Battle of Algiers is about how these the French who were occupying Algeria, and the Algerians found a way to defeat the French. Salvador, I've already mentioned about what is going on in El Salvador. JFK obviously is a good film as well. I love that film. It's another film I watch at least once or twice a year. And then there's a movie called Khartoum. Sorry can I add one more?
No, please.
A movie called Khartoum, Khartoum. I didn't want to. It was one of the first that came to my head, but I didn't want to say it because of the agenda. It's basically about Sudan and how Sudan's Africans defeated the Egyptians, and then the British came and avenged them in the late 1800s. So those are 6 films.
Interesting. Favorite film that you have directed or acted in?
Favorite film? I think the film I've got coming out. Oh, film or documentaries included, or just film?
Yeah, anything. Yeah.
Ooh, okay, so the film I've just made, I think is a good film, really good film. It's called Catching a Thief. So that'll be out later in the year. Catching a Thief, and then my favorite documentary is Dahomey and Vodun. My documentary about the Vodun spiritual system and the Dahomey Kingdom. It's called Dahomey and Vodun. My favorite documentary.
I'm really looking forward to the Catching the Thieves, man. It's really sound interesting.
No problem. I'll send you.
I really hope that may that movie international breakthrough for you.
Thank you. I hope so. Yeah. Thank you very much.
So one thing you wish more people knew about African cinemas.
That West Africans have a film festival that's been going on for almost 60 years called ESPACO, in a country called Burkina Faso, which is the Pan-African Film Festival. And the people that pioneered that film festival had major films that were successful, not box office, but critically successful all across the world. So I'm talking of people like Ousmane Sembène, like I mentioned before, Diop Mambéty, Gaston Caboret, and so on. There are many more. at FESPACO. I was very fortunate. One of my films played at that festival, and it was an honor. It was an honor. Not because it's I got a lot of money. I didn't, I in fact they didn't even fly me out. I had to fly myself there. But it was such an honor to have a film screen at that festival that I was like, I'm definitely going.
Yeah. So, what is the biggest misconception about filmmaking in general?
I think people think it's easy, and that's why it's easy to criticize. I think it was Polanski, some filmmaker. Who was it? Fellini, I think. Fellini, the great Italian filmmaker, he said once that it takes a year to make a film, or 2 years to make a film, and 2 hours to critique it, or 20 minutes to critique it. I forget what the quote was.
Yeah.
So we can watch a movie and just, it's rubbish. It didn't make sense. You don't know what's going into it. You don't even know the subtext. A good movie, a decent movie, you have to watch more than once to understand. If there's a movie that you leave, unless it's completely rubbish, and even in the rubbish ones, you still have to, because you see, it's even a bad movie takes time to make. So you have to really, take your time. So I think people think it's easy.
Yeah, I'm those people who think it's easy because they think that 1 minute TikTok video is, they will make it in 10 minutes. So that way, in one day they can make a 1 hour, 2 hour movie.
Yeah, and that's why I think films are dying right now. It's now more streaming.
Yeah,
series are more important now because you need time. This audience is so quick to do. So now you need time to really explore character, explore the story, and then
Yeah. True. So, if you weren't a filmmaker, what would you be doing?
I'm kind of already doing it. I'll be a teacher. I've taught before as well. Or I would be I'll be involved in either government or something related to policy making somehow, whether it's in the government or for NGO maybe. But teaching is ultimately the only other thing I would consider doing. I taught for 15 years, secondary school level. I taught a variety of subjects. Teaching is incredible. It's not well paid. It's not well appreciated. But if I had my opportunity now, I would teach at university level, or even I even love even young kids. I like teaching, but education is because that's what I think I do with my work.
That's interesting, man. So the best compliment you have ever received?
It's actually a comment from a documentary that I put out, and somebody said, I'm on the I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said something like, I'm on the path that the ancestors wanted me to be on, which is powerful. In African culture, we even name our children based on the ancestors. In places like Ghana, they name them according to the day of the week. In the Yoruba, they give them a name from an ancestor that died. Even in my own family, my daughter is named after my late sister. We have this culture that the ancestors are always with you and they are showing you where to go. So when somebody said that to me, that's the one comment I've had a lot of nice comments, but that's one that it always reminds me that this thing I'm doing, the reason why I'm not getting the success is because it's not meant to be for the mainstream. It's meant to be to please a certain people. The quote that I live by in my life is a phrase by a man called Amilcar Cabral, great African. He said, we must act as though we answer to and only answer to our ancestors, our children, and the unborn. In other words, the only people that I care about what they think about me are the people who came before me, my children, and the generation that will come ahead of me. I don't care too much about press, film critics, producers, social media. I don't care. Yeah. I don't have social media because I created social media and removed it because I was just like I don't believe I should care about your opinion. I don't care,
Yep. But people are crazy because they are into social media so deep. So that's why they can't, I'm thinking other than what people saying to their photo and their comment,
Yeah. But your children, you see, when you have children, you have to think about what your children think about you. You have to. Because ultimately, they're the only one that will keep your name alive. You can see even these big companies, Warner Brothers, these companies have been around for hundreds of years. Disney, Yeah, you know the name, but you don't know who the individuals were. Because unless their children are keeping their name going, like, you don't know these people. So,
Yep.
we can
Just
quote,
like we talk Egypt thing.
yeah,
I mean, people are
exactly. Look, we quote people like Napoleon because the generations that came after him kept his name going. And that's really, it's not like he said Muhammad Ali, for example. They say he's the greatest boxer. He kept his name going. His children kept his name going. If you don't control, if your children are not proud of your achievements, they won't keep your name going. They won't. Go to the cemetery. There are thousands of graves at every cemetery. Most people can walk past somebody and not even know that was one of their grandparents or great-grandparents. They won't know unless your parents take you there.
Yep. So one last question.
Mm-hmm.
What is the best piece of advice that you ever received?
It's actually, it's not advice, but it's a quote. Richard Branson. He said, "Screw it, just do it."
Yeah.
Screw it, just do it. Like, if it doesn't go well, it doesn't go well. If it goes well, it goes well. Just do it.
Yeah. So, man, that's the end of the rapid fire, and that's the end of the podcast too.
Listen, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I had a good time. I didn't think it would last this long, but you're a very good interview, and I really wish you all the success for your podcast. And hello, everyone. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe to Shree's podcast, The Billions Insights. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to rate us 5 stars if you enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Onuora. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and insight with us today. Your passion for storytelling and dedication to highlighting African culture is truly inspiring. We can't wait to see what's next for you.
Thank you very much. And I hope this podcast continues to go on. Thank you very much for having me. And I wish you all the best in the future.
Yeah, man. Thank you. And to our listener, make sure to follow Onuora's work and keep an eye out of his upcoming projects. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Billion Insight podcast. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and stay inspired. This is Shree, your host, signing out. Peace.
Peace.
Yeah, so that's the end, man. So
thank you very much.
I hope that you had fun.
No, I did. It was just what I needed, actually.